Greetings from Toronto, Canada. I thank you for this opportunity to connect with you in the work of decolonizing the curricula in theological education. My name is HyeRan Kim Craig. I hold Timothy Eaton Memorial Church Professorship in Preaching at Emmanuel College in the Victoria University in the University of Toronto. Dr. Eve Parker asked me to talk about the importance of decolonizing the curriculum, outlining why postcolonial theology is important and how a postcolonial theology enhances pastoral studies. Please let me address Dr. Parker's request in three ways. First, naming the importance of locating oneself. Second, claiming the importance of doing postcolonial theology. And third, how postcolonial theology is closely related to pastoral studies. First of all, allow me to locate myself. I am a Korean migrant living in Canada. I am a child of refugee parents who escaped from North Korea during the Korean War in 1951. What I bring and contribute to the scholarship of homiletics is connected to my migration experience. I am a racialized, ordained woman and bilingual. Along with the ontological migration experience, these social and vocational markers affect how I engage postcolonial and feminist theories into my scholarship and teaching. Because colonialism, gender, language, and race matter to preaching. As staff in Theological Education Institute in the UK, who I assume regularly write books and journal articles in scholarly publications, I urge you to articulate your theology shaped by your social locations. This articulation should include naming your own biases and blind spots, your vantage points, as well as the limits of your perspectives as influenced by particular context. This critical self-reflective discipline is directly related to decolonizing the curricula because those of us who benefit from systematic power, including white supremacy and heterosexism, find it difficult to describe our social location, whereas for those of us who are marginalized and minoritized, self-locating is not a voluntary choice, but is often an involuntary imposition forced by the normalized gaze of colleagues, not to mention church and society at large. This othering gaze creates asymmetrical normativity. It is acceptable for white male straight scholars not to self-identify and make their claims with an assumption of universality and objectivity. In my reading in homiletics, I have noticed how few white male scholars talk about their privileges and vulnerabilities in ways that impact their scholarly writings, whereas almost every scholar who is either female or racialized brings their lived experiences as a source and a method of doing homiletical theology. That is what I mean by asymmetrical normativity at work in the academia as a fabric of society. My point here is that one tangible way to decolonize theological education is to unmask this hegemonic normativity in our scholarship when we produce educational materials and teach our students who also need to learn to self-locate themselves. Decolonizing theological curricula is not effective without cultivating the pedagogy of naming social locations, exposing our power and privilege, which has resulted from colonialism and that has been sustained by racism, notions of Christian supremacy, and sexism. Secondly, doing postcolonial theology is to put colonialism and its history and its current impact at the nexus of theological analysis and biblical exploration. That nexus includes race, ethnicity, gender, class, and sexual orientation. The world, as we know it today, is impacted by modern colonialism. It is difficult to find spots in the world map that have not been affected by colonial conquest and domination. We cannot go back to the pre-colonial world, even if we want to or successfully undo colonialism. That is the conundrum of postcolonial work And the reason why I argue that we must engage post-colonial theology, because the very term post-colonial raises the ambivalent and contradictory reality. That is, colonialism has ended and it has not ended. The consequences of colonialism remain a constant source of tension across the world. We cannot understand the present without understanding the colonialism of the past. Of course, the colonial reality today is not exactly the same reality as a century or more so ago. While the effect of colonialism is different in different regions, we must recognize that we are all in this together. Thus, we must try to untangle this messy colonial yarn that is our world. Our major thread in the tangled ball of yarn is Christianity. The modern European colonial expansion project was enmeshed with a Christian agenda. That is why interrogating colonial history and its current impact must inevitably be the task of Christian theology. God was implicated in the mining of gold and justified with the use of guns. These combined three G's, God, gold, and guns, are the grotesque face of colonialism. Missionaries went with the colonial government officials on the merchant ships and under the protection of military forces. What missionaries preached and European settlers brought also to the so-called New World were notions of Christian supremacy and cultural imperialism. The claim that Christianity is the only true, or at least truest religion, and the European culture is the most civilized culture was not a personal idea or individual opinion. Rather, these claims were made as part of a systematic program of knowledge and learning, as Edward Said called Orientalism, which is a political construct to create and maintain the asymmetric power between the so-called colonial West and the colonialized East. Granted that their heterogeneity and uneven status in an increasingly globalized world. Finally, doing post-colonial theology advances pastoral studies in multiple ways. Since post-colonial theology aims to interrogate the colonial reality, exposing its hidden past which continues to live and haunts the present, it brings to the fore pastoral issues that need to be addressed in our congregations and communities. Postcolonial theology calls for pastoral studies in a candid and critical way. There is a deep connection between the two disciplines as long as sustained attention to systems that contribute to particular suffering, which is one of the goals of pastoral studies toward healing. Pastoral studies pay attention to the brokenness arising from the situated and embodied character of human life. I speak here as a postcolonial feminist practical theologian who wrote a book called Interdependence in year 2018. Pastoral study is a sub-discipline of pastoral theology that highlights the importance of lived experiences and habitual practices. Experiential practices harness the power of sensory embodiment. Postcolonial theology in general, and postcolonial feminist practical theology in particular, affirm lived realities and are sensitive to the ways we express ourselves and also carry psychological and spiritual wounds in embodied ways. This approach grants us a more contextually astute witness to abstract issues such as global migration, neoliberal, transnational capitalism, and corrupted political systems. The work of the post-colonial theology is not only about addressing such abstract and academic issues detached from our sweaty life. Rather, it is committed to grappling with unjust forms of oppression that we carry in our personal lives and religious life. That is why post-colonial practical theology pays a close attention to body memory and muscular habits, and imagines how harnessing these embodied gifts could fund subversive movement and imagine a new world. The work of decolonizing curricula in theological education is a long journey. It requires perseverance and steady efforts. That is why it is imperative and absolutely essential to strive for a postcolonial theological model rooted in and supported by a practice, a communal, experiential, persistent, and regular discipline that I call a rehearsal of the reign of God. So let's strive for it. Thank you.